As I said to you last week, there are different versions of how exactly this Mishnah is split up. So I've got it as Mishnah 9, chapter 2, Mishnah 9. You might have it in your book. It might still be part of Mishnah 8. Doesn't make a difference. Still the same Mishnah, still the same teaching, still the same message. So don't stress about it. It's a really, really interesting Mishnah, because what we're going to meet in today's Mishnah is 5 different models, or five archetypes of what it is to be a Jewish person, specifically a Jewish leader. And then out of the 5, you'll see towards the end of the Mishnah that we then split them into 2 primary channels. So we need to explore all of that. We need to understand what is the uniqueness of each of the 5, and more specifically, why are 2 of the individuals and what they represent, why are they highlighted? And there's a great take-home lesson for us. Plus, bonus. It's always nice when there's a bonus, right? Bonus. So by Hashgacha Pratis, divine providence, the lesson we're going to learn today also ties in very nicely with the parsha this week. So you get everything rolled into one. You get a lesson about life, you get a Mishnah, you get the parsha. We are doing very well here today. I mean, it's like really exciting stuff. So where are we? Last week we learned about Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. He was the primary speaker in the previous Mishnah. Now we're going to find out about his main students. Now he had many, many students, as you can well imagine. Out of those students, there are 5 that really stand out. This is going to begin a series for us, because in today's Mishnah, we meet the students. And then in the next couple of Mishnayos, we're going to learn what their main teachings are. So it's quite important to try and remember. I know it's not always easy, but it is important to try and remember who's who, what their, so to speak, representation, what their character is, each of these 5 students, because it will obviously play into what we're going to learn in the next couple of Mishnahs. If we're going to learn things that they taught, they will obviously follow the personalities or the characteristics that they had. We're looking over here at 5 students, which is great. I mean, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, probably out of all these hundreds and hundreds, perhaps thousands of students, felt that these 5 individuals were the biggest, the greatest of them all. But the mission is not just to tell us, like, the leaderboard of Jews, who were the big students back in those days. And it's very nice, it's interesting. If you're a student of history, it's probably the kind of thing that you would find intriguing, but that's not good enough. We're not here just to dig back into the archives and pull out the Hall of Fame of the Talmudic era. These have to be lessons for us. If Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai decided that he has to tell us not just who the people are, but specifically what their uniqueness is, surely that's to teach us that we should apply these things in our lives. Also, the number 5 is very significant, because generally, in many, many places, and it's subject for not only another shir, it's subject for another series in its own right. But in many places in Torah, you will see that things are split into groups of 4, and then suddenly there's a number 5 that kind of gets pegged on at the end. And in every one of those situations, if you analyze it properly, you'll notice that the first 4 that are listed, although they are completely different, and each one is unique and individual, they operate in some sense within the same realm, within the same reality. And then you get the 5th level, or the 5th dimension, which is always in a completely different reality. It's exponentially beyond the other 4. And we're going to see that happen over here in this Mishnah. It's quite important for us to know that. So bear that in mind as well. We're going to learn about 4 sages who pretty much all belong to one realm, one level, one paradigm. And then we're going to find a 5th sage who is so incredibly different to the rest of them that he is in a totally different realm, perhaps even to the point that many people won't be able to relate to him. So that's quite interesting as well. So effectively what we're going to look at is 5 different approaches, and you may resonate with one perhaps a little bit more than the others. We're also then going to find that those 5 approaches have 2 that are highlighted out of them that become, in a sense, the dominant approaches. And always bear in mind that one of them is going to be head and shoulders above the rest. In fact, in a completely different category, totally exponentially beyond them. Okay, with that introduction, let's have a look at the Mishnah. Says the Mishnah, Chamisha Talmidim Hoyu Loi LeRabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai had 5 students. Needless to say, he had many, many more students. 5 outstanding students who are these great individuals who kind of represent everything that Judaism is about. Ve'elu hein, they are as follows. Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, very famous personality. Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, as we know, or perhaps I hope people know this, he came from quite a well-to-do family. But he had, I suppose, what was the equivalent 2,000 years ago of the parent who insists that my son is going to get a degree and he's not going to be one of those leeches who lives off society and sits in a yeshiva for his whole life. He's going to go out and he's going to work. In those days, work meant on the family farm. And Rabbi Eliezer was totally, absolutely fixated. He wanted to learn Torah. His father was dead against it. It was a lot of stress and tension between the two of them. But eventually Rabbi Eliezer ran away from home and he went off to study. And he literally had nothing, literally, to the extent that he ate whatever he could dig up, which was more mud than anything growing in it. And he went on to become one of the greatest scholars of the time, as we see over here. And eventually, when his father Hyrcanus tracked him down in Rabbi Yochanan's yeshiva, he was so taken and so proud of what his son had achieved that in spite of the fact that he had fought him all of that time, and he had wanted him to become a different person with a different direction in life, he completely embraced him and reinstated him and actually supported him and provided him with a great inheritance eventually as well. Then we have Rabbi Yoshua ben Chananya. Rabbi Yoshua ben Chananya, as we're going to discover in this Mishnah, had a very important personality in his life. While Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus was perhaps grappling with his father, Rabbi Yoshua ben Chananya, as we're going to discover, could attribute all of his greatness to his mother. So his story is probably a story that's going to resonate very strongly with you. And it will have a very good message and lesson for Jewish mothers. Then we have Rabbi Yossi HaKohen. The Mishnah will tell us about him and about Rabbi Shimon ben Nesanel. So these are the two that are kind of almost juxtaposed against each other. Rabbi Yossi HaKohen and Rabbi Shimon ben Nesanel, who are both incredibly great individuals, and yet you'll see that their two approaches to Judaism and to their commitment to Yiddishkeit and their Torah learning are almost exactly polarized, which is really, really interesting. If we're going to talk about archetypes of what a Jewish person should be, and specifically what a Jewish leader should be, well, then it's helpful to know that they don't have to be identical, that there is room for totally different approaches. And lastly, we have Rabbi Elazar ben Aroch. Rabbi Elazar ben Aroch, who, as we're going to discover, is an incredibly great scholar and an individual he's the one who's going to stand head and shoulders above everybody else. So, Hu Hayom Moine Shevacham. It's very interesting that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai even does this. He listed their greatness. Now, we know full well what happens when you start comparing people, you start highlighting things. This one is like that, and this one is like that. It's a very slippery slope. I mean, you can easily land up in a lot of trouble. This one becomes envious, and that one feels you didn't tell me this. You didn't mention that about me. That's why they often say less is more. So the only reason, obviously, that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai goes down this road is not, God forbid, to expose the one person over the other, but rather to show us exactly this point, that there are 5 major channels that a person should look to pursue. Firstly, as a student, and then, of course, the purpose of being a student is that eventually you become a teacher. So, and that's the leadership element of this. So there are 5 channels that a person could learn from out of these students on what it is that you should be doing as a student and what it is that you should eventually be doing as a teacher. Now, it's almost like bounded on both sides. You've got Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus on the one side, and you've got Rabbi Elazar ben Aroch on the other side. So those are the 2 major streams, as we're going to see. The Mishnah is going to identify them as 2 main ways in which a person should learn and serve Hashem. That's why the one starts and the other one concludes the Mishnah. So let's have a look at them. Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, Bor Sud she'enoi me'abed tipa. The description that he gives of Rabbi Elazar ben Hyrcanus is that he was like a cemented cistern that doesn't lose anything. So basically, in those days, it was quite common for people to store their water or wine in these big cisterns. And you'd keep wine often in barrels that were made out of wood, but other liquids, particularly water, you'd keep in clay cisterns. And you would coat the cistern with a kind of lime to ensure that it was waterproof so that no drops would leak out. So that's effectively what he's saying about Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, that he is like this this sealed, watertight container. Whatever he learns, he never, ever loses. In fact, some of the commentaries point out an interesting thing, that the line that they used to use, this sid, so sid is the name of it, and sud is the adjective, once it has been waterproofed. So the waterproofing material, the sid, would sometimes leak into the water and would actually make the water have a bit of a funny taste. You know, like sometimes if you leave something, okay, we're not going to go down the whole environmental wormhole now, but sometimes if you leave water in a plastic bottle for a period of time, it eventually gets a funny taste, which is why people tell you maybe you shouldn't be using plastic bottles. But the same kind of thing would have happened with this waterproofing, this lime that they used, is sometimes it would leak into the water and it would give it a bad taste. So when it says over here that he didn't lose a drop, it doesn't only mean that nothing leaked out of the canister, but it actually means that none of the coating leaked into the water. So none of the water gets lost. In other words, it's telling us two things. Rabbi Yochanan is telling us two things about Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus. On the one hand, all the information that he learnt was 100% retained in his mind. He never forgot a thing. Just like us, right? We're like that. You go to a shir and that's it. You never have to learn that thing ever again. So he retained everything 100%. But it's not only that. Not only did he retain the information, there was nothing that tainted the information from the original. Now, that's a really big deal, because it's incredible. We don't even realize to what extent when we learn something, even if we remember the information, it is incredibly unlikely that the way we remember the information is the same way that it was told. It's interesting, because we've got our preconceptions and we've got our ideas and our filters and whatever the case is. So by the time the information gets into our head, it's passed through subconsciously some filter of our own. It's like a fascinating thing. I mean, I've seen it happen many times. You know, a person turns around and says, I get feedback. I'm sure many rabbis have this. Get feedback where people say, oh, we heard that you said whatever. I'm like, I never said anything like that. But that's what happens. People hear things and they kind of cherry pick what they want to hear. And there's this slight little distortion of the information along the way. And a little distortion here becomes a great distortion down the line. So the greatness of Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus is not just that he remembered all the information, which is a huge thing. The greatness of Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus is he remembered it as it was taught, not as he filtered and interpreted it. That's really something to think about. Okay, we'll come back to Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, because there's a lot to talk about in that particular arena. That's why he's one of the main channels. Okay, so we will come back to him. But before we do that, let's look at the others. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Chananya, Ashrei Yoiladetoi. So Rabbi Yehoshua ben Chananya, it says, happy is the one who bore him, who gave birth to him. Okay? Ashrei Yoiladetoi. Now you've got to ask yourself the question, why? What's the story over here? And this is the part that I think many people will resonate with, and it's a beautiful lesson for a mother. So the story goes like this, that when Rabbi Yehoshua ben Chananya's mother was expecting him, and you can assume that he was her first child, may have been her only child, I'm not sure. But anyhow, when she was expecting him, she used to frequently go to the yeshiva, whatever the local yeshiva was, so that in utero he would hear the sound of the Torah learning. And then she would approach the sages and say, please daven for my unborn child, that one day he'll be a sage. When he was born, so then she'd take him and she'd leave his little crib inside the yeshiva for hours on end, so that the noise that he heard in his very, very formative years, growing up as a young baby, as an infant, what did he hear? He heard words of Torah. So it's for that reason that they say, Ashrei Yoiladetoi, his mother can take the credit for his greatness. The fact that he became a great sage had to do with the kind of influence that she ensured that he had. Now think about that for a minute. Think about how powerful and profound the input is on a child at that very, very, very young age, the infant stage. Very often people talk about the fact that rabbis hold all the positions and it's a male-dominant society, the patriarchy and all these things. The truth of the matter is that there's quite a lot of literature in Judaism that speaks about how the solid foundation of the Jewish world and the security of the next generation depends so much on the mother. Because the mother is the one who at that early, very formative stage, at that stage of development where we don't even understand what seeps into a child's brain and how deeply it affects them. So the mother is the one who has that impact. And there's even literature that speaks about the fact that, you know how it is, obviously in today's world, well, I shouldn't say that. Once upon a time, mothers used to sing nursery rhymes and lullabies to their children. Now in today's world, they plonk the child down in front of a screen, and there's all kinds of funny beings and creatures and purple creatures and red creatures, and some of them have antennae coming out of their heads and who knows what. And this is what influences the infant from the youngest age. But the way that it used to be in the good days in the shtetl is the mother used to sing songs, Yiddish songs often, in the shtetl was often Yiddish, and the songs used to speak about Torah is the beste schora, that, you know, how beautiful the Torah is. They used to sing about belief in Hashem. They used to speak about the child learning Kometz Aleph O, how the child learns to read the Aleph base in this holy, pristine environment. And so you can well imagine that the kind of children who grew up on that diet in their earliest years, where they're not even yet conscious of what information is coming in, that instilled within them this tremendous sense of, if nothing else, the beauty of Judaism and Yiras Shamayim, sense of consciousness of Hashem. And unfortunately, I think to a large extent the world has lost that in today's world. It's completely outsourced, and you know, whatever happens to come the child's way, that's what they get. So that's what we learn over here from Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania. Ashrei yoiladotoi. Happy is the one who gave birth to him, because she could take so much credit from his achievement. In fact, we're told that Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania, one of the things about him is that he was incredible in his kibud aim, in the way that he showed respect to his mother, and he honored his mother, which means not only did she have the impact on him that he had the right values, that he aspired to become a sage and eventually realized that aspiration, but more than that, he respected where it came from. You know, very often people believe, particularly mothers, that they are taken for granted, that their children don't appreciate them. Here's a great example of the mother who invests so deeply in her child's chinuch, in her child's education, early education, that it's embedded in him, that he knew that that's where it came from. And so he showed this incredible honor and respect to his mother. Now the word that he uses over here is the word ashrei. Ashrei, happy is the one who gave birth to him. And so if you look around throughout the Torah, the word ashrei is used in many different places. Ashrei yoshvei veisecha, which speaks about the privilege of being able to sit in a place of holiness in a shul or in a yeshiva. Ashrei semimei dorech, it talks about the greatness of the individual who has this sincere dedication to Hashem. Ashrei ha'ish asher lo halach batzus shoyim, the happiness of the person who does not follow the path of the wicked. So anytime you see the word ashrei, it usually talks about somebody who has achieved or conquered a particular area of dedication to Hashem. So they've achieved in learning, they've achieved in sincerity, they've achieved in avoiding the negative in this world. And so by saying ashrei yoladotoi, so the commentaries tell us that what it's saying about Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania is that he had mastered so many areas of personal development that all of the ashreis that are out there all applied to him. And that was the nachas of his mother. Because you know how it is. Sometimes you find a person who excels in a particular area. So they have incredible Yiras Shamayim. They're absolutely focused on not doing contrary to what Hashem wants. But they're not necessarily the biggest scholar. Or sometimes you have somebody who's a great scholar, but they don't necessarily have sincerity. So the beauty of Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania, which again is attributed to his mother, is the fact that he was holistic, that he had success in all of these areas. Now that's a frightening prospect for us, because these are supposed to be 5 different prototypes of how a Jewish person is supposed to act. And here's somebody who gets it kind of right in every area, which feeds directly into our classic inherent Jewish guilt. Oh, wonderful. So now you're telling me that I need to be a perfectionist. That's all I needed to hear. I'm already taking so much strain over this whole COVID thing and all whatever I've let down. You know, and now you're telling me that this concept of perfection, is that really what Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai wanted us to learn? Not necessarily. Because there's a question that you might have considered. I don't know, maybe you didn't think of the question. What does it say? Ashrei yoladotoi. Happy is the one who gave birth to him. Now, don't you think it would have been a little bit more appropriate and commonplace to say, Ashrei Imoi. Don't you think? Just say his mother. That's a common phrase. We know exactly who we're talking about. Why does it say Yoladatoi, the one who gave birth to him? Interesting question, right? Now, if you think about it, yes, I know I'm stepping on very thin ice over here if I start making any aspersions about when exactly a mother becomes a mother. Because you do know the difference between mothers and fathers, right? A mother, from the minute she knows that she's expecting, she is a mother, she's dreaming about the future of this child, she feels the emotion of the fetus. It's like an incredible, deep soul connection. Whereas a father is barely aware of the fact that the human being exists until such time as they can kick a ball. So you understand that it's a very dangerous game to start saying at which point you become a mother. However, the distinction the Mishnah wants to draw our attention to over here is Ashrei Yoladatoi speaks about the moment of birth. And yes, of course, a person will say, this is the moment I became a mother, and that would be appropriate. But the truth is, mother is even a verb, mothering, right? In other words, it indicates the ongoing input, and all the stress that goes with it, of a mother into her children. So here we're emphasizing Ashrei Yoladatoi, that there's something about the praise of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hanania that goes back to the moment at which he was born. At that moment, something occurred. In fact, what happened at that moment occurs to every single one of us. The problem is we don't necessarily think enough about it. At the moment that a person is born, if we think about it, at that moment, that individual is given all of the potential that they will need to develop during the course of their life. So as long as the baby is developing in the womb, we don't yet know that the baby is ready to live, right? Once the baby enters this world, we say, right, now you've been given all of the tools, all of the resources, all of the talents that you need. You are now ready to go out there. You are loaded with potential. And for the next 120 years, your job is to realize that potential. That's why they say about Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hanania, Ashrei Yoladatoi. The nachas and the happiness that both Rabbi Yehoshua had and his mother had was Yoladatoi, the fact that he learned how to realize his potential. That's the channel, that's the archetype we're talking about over here. Not to achieve perfection, because that's not an expectation for us, but to recognize our potential and to do our level best to release our potential, to live our potential, to experience our potential. That is how you serve Hashem. In fact, there's a Hasidic saying, which is recorded in the Hayom Yom, which is a book of inspiring or customs, inspiring thoughts and customs for each day of the year, the first book that the Rebbe ever published. So a few days ago, it said in the Hayom Yom that it is incredibly important to recognize your weaknesses, and as important to recognize your potential. Unfortunately, sometimes we're better at the former and not so good at the latter. We know how to recognize our weaknesses. We certainly are open and vulnerable when people point out our weaknesses, but Ashrei Yoladatoi, that's an approach to being Jewish that says, I have to recognize my potential. What did Hashem embed within me when He made me, and how do I bring that to the fore? Great lesson. Rabbi Yossi HaKohen Chosid. Rabbi Yossi HaKohen, his approach to serving Hashem, which is a channel that many people adopt, that's the approach called Chosid. And the definition of a Chosid, the Gemara tells us, a Chosid is somebody who lives lifnim mishuras hadin. So there is the strict letter of the law, and everybody is required to follow the strict letter of the law. Halacha is not, it's not negotiable, it's not optional. Like they say, it's the 10 commandments, not the 10 suggestions. So halacha we have to follow, but chosid is somebody who looks to go beyond the requirement of the law. And that's what Rabbi Yossi HaKohen did. That's what was the hallmark of his dedication to Hashem. Constantly looking for an opportunity. How can I do this mitzvah better? How can I add and embellish to the learning that I'm doing? How could I upgrade my davening? So yes, I'm at a point where I'm checking all the boxes, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, nobody can fault me. The truth is, what I really need to do is go beyond. Now that's a whole channel of how a person should serve Hashem. Unfortunately, it happens probably too often that people hide behind halacha. And they say, I'm not required to do anything more than this. I've fulfilled my halachic requirement. The Torah doesn't expect X and Y of me. So that could have been in a whole host of different areas. For example, the person says, I get up every morning and I daven. And in the evening, I daven again. Or the person can say, I know that you're required to learn Torah in the morning and in the evening, so I learn Torah. Pirkei Avos Shachris, Pirkei Avos Arvis, as the Gemara says, that I should have my set period of learning in the morning, set period of learning in the evening. Or I give my 10% of tzedakah. Or I allocate a certain amount of time to people. I'm a good heart, so I go out and I assist people. And very often what happens to us is we kind of create for ourselves a comfort zone of Judaism. So Rabbi Yossi HaKohen's approach says, Chassid, if I live in the comfort zone of Judaism, how do I know that I'm actually serving Hashem? Perhaps what's going on over here is I'm actually serving myself. These are things that I relate to. They are things that I resonate with. And so it's okay, it's comfortable for me. Chassid, he says, go out there and push yourself and do something that is not necessarily comfortable and that doesn't just fulfill the exact black and white parameters of the Shulchan Aruch, but goes beyond and pushes you to say, I'm serving Hashem, I'm always challenging myself. Rabbi Shimon ben Nesanel Yirei Chet. Rabbi Shimon ben Nesanel is the opposite extreme. So Rabbi Yossi HaKohen's approach is add more, do more, be more of a chassid. In other words, your whole flavor should be chesed, goodness, kindness, adding, embellishing. Whereas Rabbi Shimon ben Nesanel says the opposite, Yirei Chet, that your approach to Yiddishkeit should be the fear of sin. Now, some of us will resonate much more with the Kohen Chassid approach, and some of us will resonate much more with the Yirei Chet approach, and they're both valid approaches within Judaism. So what's Yirei Chet? Notice that the expression over here is not Yirei Oynesh, that this is somebody who's afraid of sin, of the punishment for sin, because that's not a good strategy. When a person takes the approach that they say, I'm afraid of what's going to happen if I do anything wrong, and some people do live that way, not only in their Judaism, that's how they live in life. They are risk averse. And they just pretty much do things because the consequences are too frightening, they're too overwhelming. That works some of the time. And then other times you say, I don't know. The consequences are not happening now, they're in the next world, and we don't even necessarily have evidence that all of the stuff actually happens, right? It's on faith. But the benefit / pleasure that I could have right now of doing what I want to do, which is not necessarily allowed, actually seems quite attractive. So if a person takes the attitude of Yiras Ha'oinesh, that their fear is of consequences, they are not necessarily guaranteed that they're going to behave as they should. Whereas if a person takes the attitude of Yirei Chet, which means I'm actually afraid of the sin, that's a completely different concept. Now what's interesting is, it does not say Yirei Aveira, which is the classic word that we use for sin, or Yirei Avoin. Okay, so we interchangeably use all three terms. Chet, Aveira, Avoin. If you really want to be radical, you can say Pesha. Pesha is like rebellious and malicious, so it doesn't really fit in this conversation. But there's something unique about the word Chet. Something people often don't think about. It's quite relevant, incidentally, when you talk about Chet Eitzada'as or Chet Ha'egel, the so-called sin of the forbidden fruit by Adam and Eve, or the so-called sin of the golden calf. Now, I've deliberately said that just to make you curious, because they both then deserve a share at least on their own. What does the word Chet mean? So Aveira comes from the word Oyuver, which means to cross over. So you're in the realm of holiness, you're in the realm of connection to Hashem. By doing this particular action, God forbid, you cross over into a different realm, a realm of disconnection from Hashem, a realm where you have, so to speak, rebelled, and now you've got to find your way back. That's the idea of an Aveira, right? Aveira, you oiver, you cross over, and now you have to be shoiv, you have to return to where you came from. Chet has a different meaning. Interestingly, the word chet actually means lack. That means that sometimes you could use the word chet where a person actually hasn't sinned, but all they have done is they lack something in their dedication. So there's a mitzvah to be done, and that the way they did it wasn't 100%. It was chet, it was lacking. Rabbi Shimon ben Nesanel says, Yirei Chet. I should not be afraid of, oy vey, what's going to happen to me? When is the lightning bolt going to strike if I don't do what I should? That's not his concern. He says, Chet, I'm going to lack something. There's going to be a piece of my life missing. There's going to be a chunk of my neshama that was left unattended. With that kind of an attitude, if a person lives that way, Yirei Chet, first of all, you don't live with fear in the Yiras Oinesh, the fear of consequences. A person is actually afraid. You're actually like looking over your shoulder. That's the person who says, oh, I shouldn't have said that. Who knows what's going to happen now? Or the person who comes to the rabbi and says, do you think I'm being punished? Which incidentally happens quite a lot. People come, this has happened in my life. Do you think I'm being punished? But Yiras Chet is a completely different software. Yiras Chet says, I don't want to be in a situation where I'm losing out, where there's something missing in my life. And so the person can never say, well, maybe it's worthwhile the short-term pleasure for the long-term, perhaps fictional punishment in the next world. Here the person says, I don't want to lose. I understand and I appreciate that every time I choose to do something which is contrary to what Hashem wants, I'm losing right now in a real tangible sense. And then finally we have Rabbi Elazar ben Aroch kemayon hamizgaber. Rabbi Elazar ben Aroch is compared to a spring that continues to flow stronger and stronger. Now, if you know anything about springs, that does not actually make sense. And we'll talk about that. It seems to be a strange metaphor to use. A spring that gets stronger. It might have made more sense to say a river that gets stronger. You know, think of the white water rapids of a river, then you think of mizgaber, something that's getting more powerful. When you think of a bubbling brook, you think of a nice little spring. You don't really get that sense of mayan mizgaber. So we'll have to come back to Rabbi Elazar ben Aroch. Remember that Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus at the beginning and Rabbi Elazar ben Aroch at the end, they are the two major streams that we have to explore. So they really need a lot of attention. And in order to see how they're the two main streams, look, the Mishnah does it right here. The Mishnah turns them into the two center points of the conversation. Hu hoya oimer, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai used to say, Im yiyu kol chachmei Yisrael b'chafmo iznayim. If you would take all of the sages of Israel, including Rabbi Yossi HaKoyen, and Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya, and Rabbi Shimon ben Nesanel, and Rabbi Elazar ben Aroch, if you had to take all of them, and put them on a scale, Eliezer ben Hyrcanus bechaf shnia, and then you'd put Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus on the other side of the scale, machria es kulam. He would outweigh them all. Abba Shaul oimer mishmoy, and then Abba Shaul comes along and he quotes Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Now Abba Shaul, according to the tradition, was not a student of Rabbi Yochanan himself. He was a student of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva being like, 2 generations down. We don't know a lot about Abba Shaul. What we do know is that if somebody is called Abba, it's a title. It's not a name. It's a title of honor and respect. Abba Shaul. What we do know about Abba Shaul, a few little scant details that we know about him. We know that he worked in the cemetery. Usually that's something that you imagine is not for big Torah scholars. We know that he was a very tall man. That's what we know. He was a very tall person. And what we know is that Abba Shaul was an individual who was an exceptional scholar. So it's quite interesting because you've got Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai who knew these people firsthand saying something, and then Abba Shaul coming to teach us a tradition that obviously filtered down. It's Mishmoy, it's still in Rabbi Yochanan's name, but it seems to contradict what he just said. Because Rabbi Yochanan said if you take all of the sages, including Rabbi Elazar ben Aroch, and you put them on one side of the scale, Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus will completely outweigh them. Now Abba Shaul tells us, I heard Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai say, Im yu kol chachmei Yisrael b'chafmo iznayim ve'Eliezer ben Hyrcanus afi moyim ve'Elazar ben Aroch b'chaf shnia machrias kulam. I heard that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, if you take all of the sages of Israel, including Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, on the one side of the scale, and you put Rabbi Elazar ben Aroch on the other side of the scale, he will outweigh them. Now that seems to be contradictory, because in the first case you indicated that if Rabbi Elazar ben Aroch is on the one side, Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus will outweigh him. And now you're saying that if Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus is on the one side, Rabbi Elazar ben Aroch will outweigh him. Now that does not make any sense. Not in the laws of physics, and not in any logical attempt that you're going to make to explain the story. So what is going on over here? So in order to understand this, we need to appreciate that Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus and Rabbi Elazar ben Aroch represent these two major channels of what it means to be Jewish, what it means to be a Jewish student, and critically, most importantly, what it means to be, so to speak, a custodian of Torah to the next generation, a leader. So before we do that, before we look at the two of them, we've got Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus on the one hand, Bor Sud She'enoi Me'abei Tipa. He is this absolutely watertight container that whatever he learns is never lost, not one iota. On the other hand, we have Rabbi Eliezer ben Aroch, K'mayon HaMizgaber, like the stream that just keeps flowing. Can you see the difference? Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus is the icon of consolidation. Rabbi Eliezer ben Aroch is the icon of innovation. There are two kinds of students that you get. And they're both critically important for Judaism. Critically important. The one kind of student that you get is the student who sits in front of the teacher and disappears. I am not in the room. I'm just a container. Whatever flows in, I am like a tape recorder. Whatever flows in, I've got. Sealed, filed, you can retrieve it at any time. It could be 50 years down the line and it will be as pristine as when I heard it the first time. Now that's critically important because that individual is going to be somebody who preserves the integrity of Torah from generation to generation. We have to have those people. The only thing that Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus will not do, by definition, he won't teach new insights. By definition, because his job is consolidate. And if he is going to appear on scene with his own thoughts and his own innovation, then he destroys his entire model, because his model is we keep things watertight. We lose nothing. Rabbi Eliezer ben Aroch has a completely different approach. Rabbi Eliezer ben Aroch says, look, I'm going to innovate so much insight, so much perspective, so much depth, that I'm like a stream, or more specifically, a spring that rages like a river. That is an unnatural state. A spring should not rage like a river. But that's the greatness of Rabbi Eliezer ben Aroch. I'm going to do something which actually doesn't even make sense. You could never have predicted it. Meaning to say, I'm going to take that little bit of teaching and turn it into a massive river. And then I'm going to take the next little bit of teaching and develop it into a massive river. Rabbi Eliezer ben Aroch is the individual who says, let's take what we are given and let's transform it into something which is, and here's an important term, and it relates a little bit to his name, which is Be'ein Aroich. It is completely beyond what I was originally given. So let's say somebody gave you a seed, and you're able to then plant and fertilize that seed and produce a tree. So what you were given compared to what you've returned is incomparable. That's Rabbi Eliezer ben Aroch. So there are two versions of how a person should be a student. There are 5 versions in total, but there are 2 primary versions: consolidation or innovation. What's important to know is this: Rabbi Eliezer ben Aroch, as much as he will contribute, as much as he will innovate, as much as he will teach, the Mishnah introduces him as a student of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, and he knows it. He never runs away with himself and starts to think I'm a big deal. He never lets his incredible ability go to his head. He recognizes whatever I share is only what I have been given. Because I had a brilliant teacher, that's why I've got so many of these seeds that I can cultivate and grow into these streams of knowledge that were not necessarily known before. But all I'm doing is I'm developing what the teacher had already given me. So, I did promise you that it's related to the parasha, right? So let's see how it relates to the parasha. In this week's parasha, we're going to learn that towards the end of his life, Yitzchak wants to bless his son Esav. And we all know how the story goes. It's highly controversial, but long story short, Yaakov gets the brochas instead of Esav. In the beginning, I think it's Shishi. In the parasha, it starts with a Vav. And we all know that if you had a decent English teacher at school, you don't start a sentence with and. You definitely don't start a whole new paragraph with and. And yet it says, Ve'yiten lecha. Ve'yiten lecha elikim mital hashamayim mishmanei ha'aretz ve'evdagim ve'siroish. And Hashem will give you from the dew of the heavens, which really represents the highest, loftiest spiritual brachas, Umishmane haaretz, and the fattiest, most materialistic brachas. In other words, what Yitzchak effectively gave, as he says later, by the way, to Esav. When Esav comes crying and says, "Oh, what about me?" Yitzchak says, "Oops, I've given everything to Yaakov." And Esav says, "Halo yatzalteli bracha, have you not kept me any bracha?" Why? Because he really gave everything to Yaakov, top to bottom, tal hashamayim to shmanei haaretz, from the most sublime to the most materialistic. So the question everybody wants to ask is, why does it start and yitem? Rashi says, you know why it starts with and? Because yitain v'yachzor v'yitain. What it means is that Yitzchak told Yaakov, Hashem will give you, and then he will give you more. Which raises, that's what Rashi says, which raises an incredible question. If I, a human being, give you something, then it is shaykh, it's possible that later I'll add to it, because I'm a human. I have severe limitations. So if I give you information, if I give you time, if I give you emotion, if I give you money, if I give you resources, whatever I give you is limited. So therefore, it's quite normal for humans to say, I'll give you some more time next week. I'll give you some more information at the next year. I'll give you some more money when I get my salary. That's how we are. Yitain v'yachzor v'yitain. We give and then we give again. But Hashem doesn't have those limitations. Surely, if Hashem gives you a bracha that goes mital hashamayim all the way to shmanei haaretz, from top to bottom, surely there's nothing more to give after that? Surely? That's the bracha that Yitzchak gave Yaakov. It is the bracha of what it is to be Jewish. Yitain, first Hashem is going to give you, like Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai gives to Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus. And you're going to take that all and you're going to absorb it absolutely in the most incredible, pristine way. And if you do that, you'll be a tzaddik. Because only a tzaddik can take what Hashem gives and preserve it beautifully, perfectly, as it is, without any corruption. And then there are a whole bunch of us, unfortunately, a present company excluded, obviously, who are not such tzaddikim. So when Hashem gives us the yitain, we don't necessarily, we kind of drop it. He gives us, and we get distracted, and we do something else. We don't necessarily look where we're going, and things kind of fall apart. And then we turn around and we say, oi, what am I supposed to do now? Hashem gave me something. He's never going to trust me again. He's never going to give me again. So that's when we have to do what is called being a Baal Teshuvah. And to be a Baal Teshuvah means you have to learn how to be Kamayon HaMizgaber. Baal Teshuvah, you've got this little spring, this little short, tiny little stream of inspiration left. This little bit of Yiddishkeit that you're kind of clinging to. And you've got to do the unnatural. Make it Kamayon HaMizgaber. Turn it into something powerful. When you do that, V'yachzor v'yitain, then Hashem is going to give you more than He even planned to give to the tzaddik. That's why the Gemara tells us that where Baal Teshuvah stands, a tzaddik cannot reach. That's why the Zohar tells us that a tzaddik serves Hashem in an orderly fashion, and a Baal Teshuvah serves Hashem in a way that is b'chela yater, with exceptional power. That's why we're told that a Baal Teshuvah can turn his life around b'shaita choda over riga choda in a flash. Doesn't make sense. You're right, it doesn't make sense. That's the greatness. Kamayon HaMizgaber. Incidentally, that's why Yitzchak originally intended to give the bracha to Esav, because Esav really needed that kind of miracle in his life to turn himself around. Esav was so off the derech, he needed a major yitain v'yachzor v'yitain to bring him back online. So why didn't he give the bracha to Esav? What did Rivka see that Yitzchak kind of overlooked? Rivka saw, I'm sorry to tell you, Yitzchak, plenty of Yaakov's children in the future will be that far gone that they'll need that bracha. You don't have to save Esav. There's plenty Yaakov descendants to save. And so the bracha that we're given is the two paths of Judaism. There's the Eliezer ben Hyrcanus path for the person who is a tzaddik. Take everything Hashem gives you, hold on to it, and you'll be good. And then there's the path which is the Baal Teshuvah path like Rabbi Elazar ben Aruch, which is most of us. If you feel that you've drifted, know that you have the capacity to take what Hashem has given you, like Rabbi Elazar ben Aruch took the teachings that his teacher Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had given him, to take those teachings and transform them into a Mayon HaMizgaber, an incredible, unexpected, overwhelming power. And that's really something we should all think about all the time. Don't beat ourselves up over where we may have mistaken or let ourselves go or missed the point, but recognize at all times that we have the opportunity and the potential to turn even our worst mistakes into the most incredible opportunity to reconnect.